Good afternoon. Welcome to this afternoon's meeting. Sorry, Miss Wheat. Okay, now that I have waited for Miss Wheat to get going, we welcome everybody to this afternoon's meeting. Before we start, I'd like to ask everyone to please bow your head for a moment of silent reflection. Amen. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Minges.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners.
Wait a minute. Before we start, I will need to make, we got everybody online that's supposed to be joining us by phone. Okay, Mr. Erskine gives me the thumbs up. Okay. I've been asked to make sure that you guys that vote by voice, by disembodied voice, do it one at a time. So we're going to ask you to say who you are and vote so that our folks here that are counting know who's voting for what. Okay, now Mr. Minges.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. Our next agenda meeting is scheduled for Monday, November 25th, 2019 at 11:30.
Thank you.
On our supplemental agenda, item number 1, docket number 2019-326E, we have a request from Dominion Energy to either cancel or consolidate docket number 2019-197E with the present docket.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Hamilton.
Mr. Chairman, in docket number 2019-326E, South Carolina Energy Freedom Act, House Bill 3659, proceeding to address South Carolina Code annotated 5827-460A and 1, and South Carolina Code annotated section 5827-460A and 2. Promulgation and periodic review of standards for interconnection and parallel operations of generating facilities and on our electric utility distribution and transmission system. Staff presents for Commission consideration to address the establishment of proceedings for the purpose of considering revisions to the standards promulgated pursuant to South Carolina Code annotated section 5827-460. Recently, the Commission established a new docket, 2019-326E, to consider revisions to the standards for interconnection. With the opening of this new docket, there are now 2 separate dockets to address Subpart A and Subpart D of section 5827-460. Accordingly, I move that we instruct the clerk's office to administratively close docket number 2019-197-E and set an intervention deadline. I also move that we invite the parties to confer and suggest a procedural schedule for this docket. So move, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. You've heard Commissioner Hamilton's motion. Are there questions or comments? If not, all in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
We'll ask, okay, I'm going to ask you, Commissioner Howard, I think I heard you say aye. Commissioner Williams?
Aye. Yep. Aye.
Aye.
Commissioner Irvin?
Aye.
Thank you. And motion carries.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, on our utilities agenda, item number 1, docket number 2019-184E. This matter concerns the Commission's ruling on avoided costs and related matters regarding the Dominion Energy South Carolina.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Whitfield.
Mr. Chairman, this motion, this docket deals with the Commission administering a newly enacted Act, Act 62, passed this year by the General Assembly. And Mr. Chairman, I have a quite lengthy motion regarding this topic, so bear with me. Mr. Chairman, I would like to make motions regarding the Dominion Energy avoided cost issues in this docket 2019-184-E. First, Mr. Chairman, I would note that we have an outstanding motion, a motion to strike filed by Dominion, which seeks to strike the Power Advisory LLC report. In essence, Dominion charges that Power Advisory did not properly perform its duties under Act 62 by failing to create independently generated recommendations. This is a misunderstanding of the plain language of Act 62. By that, I mean it is readily apparent that the Commission's independent consultant is statutorily charged with, among other things, independently evaluating the positions proposed by the parties to the case. In light of the plain language of Act 62, Mr. Chairman, I move that we deny Dominion's motion to strike. Next, I would like to address the issue of transparency in this case. Transparency for the purposes of these proceedings is a twofold concept. The willing and timely responses to requests for production is one part of transparency. Further, the utilities report is to be reasonably transparent so that underlying assumptions, data, and results can be independently reviewed. Power Advisory reports that Dominion responded to all requests for production. However, there was a concern that the underlying assumptions, data, and results did not have documentation presented that would allow for accessible analysis. While Dominion adequately responded to requests for production as expected, I move that we instruct Dominion to present substantially more information about the underlying assumptions and data, such that the parties to such proceeding may more meaningfully evaluate and analyze methodologies and models employed by the utility. I move that we adopt the recommendations in the Power Advisory Report in respect to the company's future avoided cost filings. The methodologies used by Dominion in this case is the difference in revenue requirement method. I move that we find this method is designed to reasonably reflect the utility's actual cost and the avoided cost of power production pursuant to South Carolina Code Section 58-41-20B3. Dominion proposed variable integration charges, referred to as VIC, and embedded integration charges, referred to as EIC, both of which are designed to reflect the additional cost of connecting solar power generation to the company's system. Specifically, the VIC was to be applied to existing generators, and the EIC was to be applied to future generators via an embedded reduction in the avoided cost rate available to those generators. Mr. Chairman, I move that we accept Power Advisory's recommendations to apply an interim value of $2.29 megawatt hour to both the VIC and the EIC in order that we initiate an integration study in accordance with South Carolina Annotated Section 58-37-60 in Dominion's balancing area. Once the integration study process set out in Section 58-37-60 is completed, I move that we initiate a proceeding as allowed under South Carolina Code 58-41-20A for the purpose of addressing Dominion's avoided cost, armed with publicly reviewed evaluation of solar integration in Dominion's balancing area. Mr. Chairman, in consideration of avoided capacity, as Mr. Oree points out, the company's proposed avoided capacity is calculated using several inputs or assumptions that are inaccurate. Namely, the reserve margin, excessive and inconsistent use of low-cost capacity purchases, an overly long combustion turbine life, and a mismatch between the avoided cost resource change and the assumed size of a combustion turbine unit. However, Dominion witness Lynch also performed effective load carrying capability, or an ELCC, analysis that resulted in, among other things, a 4% capacity value for solar. I move that we accept the recommendation of Power Advisory and accept the 4% capacity value, which is derived by the ELCC analysis performed by Dr. Lynch and uses an industry standard methodology according to Power Advisory. Mr. Chairman, the avoided cost rates recommended by Power Advisory are just, reasonable, and reasonably reflective of the utility's cost of generation. Those costs are as follows. Avoided capacity. This commission agrees with Power Advisory's recommendation that avoided capacity rates proposed by ORS witness Ori in direct evidence be approved with one potential correction. The capacity rate for solar should be adjusted to reflect an ELCC value for a 93 megawatt increment above the current existing and contracted solar capacity. This contracted capacity is 1,048 megawatts, which implies a capacity value of 4%, as I previously discussed. The avoided energy, and Mr. Chairman, I have some charts that I do request be included in our directive, in our directive and in our final order. But for avoided energy, the PR1 avoided energy rates for solar QFs time period May 2019 to April 2020 is in dollars, but we're talking cents here, 0.03114 kilowatt hours. Rate PR standard offer year 2020 to year 2024, 0.02112 kilowatt cents per hour. Rate PR standard offer going beyond that from year 2025 to year 2029 is 0.02375 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, Mr. Chairman, I want to move to the net energy metering and distributed energy resource values. Again, table that I would like to be included in the directive and in our order. Table 4, current period DER and 2019 and proposed 2019, E3 recommended. E3, the recommended current period figures would be 0.03022 avoided energy cost, and the total value of DER would be 0.03349. Again, I would ask that those charts be put into our directive. Mr. Chairman, for the 10-year levelized DER would be 0.02787 total value of DER. I move that we adopt these avoided cost rates, and again, I request these charts be included in the directive. There are other contract terms that my motion needs to address, most notably the contract length. The General Assembly has mandated that electric utilities must initially offer to purchase power from QS pursuant to a fixed price PERPA PPAs with commercially reasonable terms and a duration of 10 years. Act 62 also provides that the Commission, and I quote, may approve commercially reasonably fixed price purchase power agreements with a duration longer than 10 years, which must, and I emphasize must, contain additional terms, conditions, and or rate structures as proposed by intervening parties and approved by the Commission, including, but not limited to, a reduction in the contract price relative to the 10-year avoided cost, end quote. South Carolina Code Section 58, dash 41 dash 20F1 is what I just quoted in quotes. In her testimony, Johnson Development witness Chilton agreed that a decrement to the 10-year avoided cost rate is required in order for the commission to adopt a fixed price contract for a term longer than 10 years. In her pre-file rebuttal testimony, she left open the possibility to later offer testimony regarding various methods of complying with Act 62 requirements for longer-term contracts. However, that testimony was never offered. She did not identify any specific proposal that Johnson Development supported to comply with statutory requirements for the Commission to consider a longer-term fixed PPA. Therefore, the Commission approval of a fixed price power purchase agreement with a duration longer than 10 years is not supported by the evidence in this record. Only a 10-year contract term is, because any determination by the Commission to approve contracts longer with a duration longer than 10 years must be predicated on specific proposals from interveners that comply with South Carolina Code 58-41-20F1 and are entered into the evidentiary record during the course of this proceeding. I move that we decline to approve proposals from Johnson Development and SCSBA at this time. I do note that such proposals and others may appropriately be addressed in the record in the next avoided cost proceeding, such that all parties may have their due process rights protected. There are other contract terms and conditions that were at issue in this case, and I would address them as follows. Number one, regarding liquidated damages and extension payments, I move that we approve the liquidated damages provision as described by witness Levitas in his rebuttal testimony on this matter. In that testimony, liquidated damages are based on expected annual capacity payments up to 15 megawatts and a $10,000 per megawatt payment over 15 megawatts. Number two, regarding guaranteed energy production, I move that Dominion Energy South Carolina's provision for termination if the facility fails to deliver 85% of the guaranteed energy production in any 2 consecutive contract years should be eliminated from PPAs. Number three, regarding energy storage, I move that we accept the power advisory recommendation and decline to require contract terms and conditions regarding energy storage and power purchase agreements at this time, since SBA and the company entered into a settlement agreement, entered into a settlement which requires to make a filing by December 31, 2019 regarding energy storage contract terms, as such settlements are recognized as not being superseded by Act 62. Number four, regarding termination payment, I move that we accept the power advisory recommendation and order that the floor on damages be removed and that the formula provided by power advisory be used to reflect the cost of replacement energy at the then current cost of replacement energy. Number five, regarding limited PPA eligibility following termination, I conclude that restricting the ability to pursue fixed pricing is inconsistent with PURPA, and therefore that we adopt Mr. Levitas' recommendation of implementing damages per the standard offer and form PPA for failure to execute a PPA in a timely fashion. Number five, regarding the day in service deadline, I move that we approve a requirement to deliver power within 365 days of establishing a LEO, but accept the power advisory recommendation reflecting Mr. Levitas' proposal that it is reasonable and logical to align PPA terms with the LEO requirements and that the NOC form acknowledge excusable delays that would impact the in-service deadline. Number seven, I move that we not require the eligibility preconditions sought by Dominion Energy South Carolina regarding permitting. Mr. Chairman, an order more fully setting out our rulings will follow, but, Mr. Chairman, this is my motion.
Thank you. You've heard Commissioner Whitfield's motion. Are there questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman, this is Commissioner Williams.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams.
First, I'd like to address the transparency issue. It's very concerning to me that the expert for the commission, Power Advisory, was concerned about the lack of transparency in the avoided cost methodology. Well, we know that to some degree, we're here dealing with Act 62 because the General Assembly wanted to sort of change the status quo and try to give ratepayers opportunity to understand how they were charged for energy and what this process looks like to a layman, so that everyone could follow along, if you will. And while I understand the motion suggests that Dominion demonstrate more transparency moving forward, I think it's completely unacceptable, considering the background regarding why we're here, that an outside independent expert who really knew nothing about what was going on in South Carolina's energy portfolio before this hearing echoes some of the same complaints that this commission and others have had regarding transparency with Dominion, formerly SCE&G. I would hope moving forward in avoided cost hearings and all other matters coming before the commission that Dominion do everything within its power to be completely transparent with all matters coming before this commission. Lack of transparency is completely unacceptable and will not be tolerated. Moving on, I must say that I'm concerned that the motion has limited the contract term to 10 years. I'm concerned by that because I recall hearing much testimony regarding the inability of solar companies to receive financing for contract terms that were shorter in length, such as the 10-year contract term. I remember hearing testimony that at least, at a minimum, a 15-year contract term would be sufficient to secure financing. The expert Power Advisory also suggests contract terms longer than 10 years in order for this to be economically viable. And so my question would be, if we pass this motion with a contract term of 10 years and the solar community is unable to secure financing for their facilities, have we met the intent of Act 62? And that's not a rhetorical question.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
you want to? Okay. I think Commissioner Belser may have a comment, Commissioner Williams, but I certainly share your concerns about the links and ability to obtain financing. And I certainly understand the desire of some of the parties to have longer contract lengths. However, Commissioner Williams, and again, certainly hear and share your concern, but in this case, the record is completely without supporting evidence for terms and conditions that would allow us to establish longer terms contracts at this time. And if we were to establish such contracts, it would be a violation of Act 62 and a violation of due process. And in my view, we just simply cannot do it based on the evidence of the record in this case. And going forward, Commissioner Williams, I think with these integration studies, as solar continues to be deployed, these integration studies that we're requesting in this motion would allow us to see where things stand as solar continues to be employed in, as Act 62 expects it to do, the Energy Freedom Act, and as it continues to be deployed, I believe we will see, and as we've talked about, Commissioner Williams, technology is changing very fast in this sector. As storage capabilities and storage technologies become more perfected, we may see things that could alter or change things in shorter time frames than some of the long-term contracts might lock folks into. And Commissioner Williams, I'd add one other thing I really didn't say in my motion, but just as a general thought, while not the focus of the evidence in this case, rooftop solar's position in South Carolina would be significantly improved by the adoption of the NEM values that I have proposed in my motion. And we, as you know, we've worked diligently to continue to effectuate the spirit of both Act 236, which was passed about 5 years ago, and Act 62 that was passed this year in this case. And, Mr. Chairman, beyond that, I would yield to Commissioner Belser. But I hope you understand and see where I'm coming from, Commissioner Williams. I know you think things out very carefully and methodically, and I certainly appreciate and share your concerns.
Thank you. Commissioner Belser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Williams, it's good to hear you today.
Good to be heard.
I share your concern. I had concerns at the end of the hearing that the record may not have been complete with regard to terms of any contract longer than that might be approved for terms using terms for periods longer than 10 years. But I do note that in Act 62, that where the Commission is provided with authority to approve fixed price purchase power agreements with durations longer than 10 years, that it is a may, that the Commission may approve commercially reasonable fixed price power purchase agreements with a duration longer than 10 years. And then the must comes in with which must contain additional terms, conditions, and/or rate structures as proposed by intervening parties and approved by the Commission. And I invite you, I invite the parties, once the order comes out, point out where in the record these additional terms and conditions are. And I've been going through the transcript, and I just can't find those precise extra terms and conditions. I share your concern. I think that the legislature is telling us to provide as many avenues as possible for solar to be developed in South Carolina and given the opportunity to thrive in South Carolina. And I would like to do that, but based on the record, and I note that proposed orders are not evidence of record. I just can't get to that point, and I welcome anybody pointing that out after the order comes out where we've missed that. But I share your concern. But when we're tasked with making a decision based on the provisions of the Administrative Procedures Act and based on the statutes in Title 58, which require us to make findings of fact and conclusions of law based on the record before us, that's what I'm trying to go with. So I do share your concern, and I just I can't make that leap without being directed to where it is in the record.
Thank you, Commissioner Belser. Also, the commissioners that are on the phone, when you're not speaking, if you would mute your phone, we're getting a lot of extra here over the loudspeakers. Okay. *6 will mute, *7 will unmute, I've been told. Okay. Other comments? Commissioner Williams, you have any more?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I appreciate the responses and the additional commentary from my colleagues. When I look at that, I believe it's F sub 1, section 58-41-20 F1. And I have limited capability here, but I'm reading a sentence that says the commission may determine any other necessary terms and conditions deemed to be in the best interest of ratepayers. And when I think about this statute, I think about how the legislator wanted to create avenues and opportunity for small power producers to diversify South Carolina's energy portfolio, to provide avenues to get away from paying for large power plants as opposed to, instead of doing that, relying on solar energy. I'm concerned, again, that the ratepayers may not be, they may be harmed if that 10-year contract term is not conducive to financing. Now, I understand the concerns about the evidence of record, but I got to be honest with you. I think there obviously there are a multitude of opinions regarding how Act 62 should be construed. And I just believe that the legislature has empowered us to do what's right when it comes to implementing the Act based on what has been presented to us. And based on what I heard in the record, I think, and based on Act 62, and also based on our expert who also says that longer contract terms are necessary, I think that's enough for us to make that decision. But respectfully accept the comments of my colleagues. I just have a difference of opinion.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Irvin.
Thank you, sir. I also share Commissioner Williams and Commissioner Belser's concerns. I've found this entire process to be very frustrating because I think all of us anticipated throughout the process that at some point the interveners, particularly the solar providers, would come forward and present detailed alternatives for contract lengths longer than 10 years. And I was shocked to find at the end of the hearing it simply hadn't happened. Now, there was some talk in the Duke docket, and of course we're not discussing that yet, so I won't linger on it, but Duke did address the overpayment risk of longer-term fixed-price contracts. And I'm sure you can remember that Witness Brown testified that, the primary components that contribute to overpayment risk for ratepayers under the PURPA power purchase agreements are, 1, the proper accounting for avoided cost rates, 2, the length of the contracts, and 3, the volume of the contracts. And he explained that the utility company's recent experience has been that paying above market avoided cost prices over a longer period of time for an infinite number of QF contracts has already resulted in a current $2.26 billion overpayment obligation that's going to be shifted to the ratepayers. Now, we saw in the not too distant past how there's some unintended consequences of legislation in the adoption of the Base Load Review Act. And I won't go through that history. We're all familiar with it. But here's the problem. Who's advocating for ratepayers in this instance? It's really a contest between the investor-owned regulated utilities and the solar providers, but who's advocating for the poor ratepayers that could get stuck with overpayments in the event that we don't predict the future correctly? And this is a difficult case to predict the future because of all the moving parts that we've been discussing. There are a lot of different things that have to be considered. Now, you all know that I've been an advocate for solar, and I want a cleaner environment. I want a greener environment, and I want our solar providers to have a fair playing field so that they're treated fairly, so that their agreements or reasonable and just and fair. But by the same token, it would not be fair to the ratepayer to overpay them. And what I came to understand is the longer we go out in terms of length of contract, the more likely we are to get it wrong. And what I mean by that is we all know that solar equipment costs are going down, and they'll continue most likely to go down over time, which is a good thing. It's a good thing for the solar community. It's a good thing for the customer. But once we lock in what's being paid for the contract price, the longer we lock it in, the more likely we are to result in an overpayment, which backfires on ratepayers in terms of higher utility bills. Somebody's got to pick up the tab. When we ask Dominion and Duke to pay solar providers a fixed price for a length of term, that money has to be replaced by the ratepayers. Now, if it's a fair price, we got it right. But the longer in time we go out, the more likely there's going to be the risk to the ratepayers of an overpayment. So I worry about that, particularly since we never heard from the solar industry and what they think would be a fair contract price relative to a contract for more than 10 years. Because remember, the law says there has to be a reduction in the contract price if we go beyond 10 years. And they never told us really what that reduction should be in the hearing itself. And as Commissioner Belser said, proposed orders are not evidence in our hearing. There were some things proposed in the orders, but never in the hearing itself. So what I'm frustrated about is we have a record before us that's inadequate, and it doesn't answer all the questions. It doesn't even ask the questions that should have been answered. And certainly it doesn't answer or provide us with the detailed terms and conditions that would warrant an extension of a 10-year power purchase agreement at this time. Now, as Commissioner Whitfield said earlier, the good news is we will have a chance to revisit this, and we will revisit it every other year, and trying to get it right, trying to make sure that what it cost rates are adjusted over time. That's the good news. And the other good news is that the solar folks will have other opportunities to make their case at that time. They also have the right to participate in the competitive bidding process, which quite honestly may result in lower cost for everyone. And so they're not totally precluded from participating in this market. And it's also come out in the record that even with a 10-year term as provided by the General Assembly, we're still going to have the longest term length for power purchase contracts in the Southeast, because the length of contracts is dropping. It's coming down. That's the national movement, is to not go out 30 years, not go 20, but we're down to an average now of 15 years, according to our own expert, Power Advisory, and that's probably going to drop even more over time. In fact, we've heard testimony that Duke has entered into 5-year power purchase agreements very recently in North Carolina. So I want to be fair to the solar providers. I also want to be fair to the companies, but most importantly, I want to be sure that the ratepayers are not stuck with a bill at the end of the day. And that could very well happen. It's already happened in North Carolina, as evidenced by the $2.26 billion overpayment obligation based upon Duke's existing PURPA obligations that are already in place. And, you know, that is a lot of money, and it's got to be paid back by the ratepayers, and that means higher bills over time. And we don't want that unintended consequence to affect our state or our business and industry, because they will be affected too. And so for those reasons, I support the motion. I also hope that as we refine the process going forward, that we can have more accurate information from Dominion, more detailed and granular information about how they arrived at their avoided cost. That is certainly a concern. I also hope that Dominion will continue to try to work on these issues with the stakeholders. As you know, we always encourage parties to reach agreements, and in fact, nothing precludes them from reaching an agreement after our order is filed. They may choose to appeal, but they can still work out their differences, and I would encourage them to do that. It's a matter of good faith. It would serve everyone's best interest. But this fear of unintended consequences is real, and it's not imaginary. And I cannot emphasize how concerned I am about the ratepayers in 10 to 15 years down the road having to eat cost increases caused by overpayment simply because we didn't have the appropriate numbers at the time we reached our decision. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Any other comments, commissioners?
Mr. Chairman, I
Commissioner Whitfield.
briefly, quick follow-up here to Commissioner Irvin. One of his concerns, Commissioner Irvin, I know you're aware that recent changes in the laws and new legislation have led to some changes in the duties of ORS, and we've been told by a question that Commissioner Williams raised that a consumer advocate is on the way. So, Commissioner Irvin, you may see that. We've been told that you're going to see that in the very near future. So,
well, it's been funded, and I think we need a consumer advocate now, because this is a perfect example in this process how the ratepayer just got kicked to the curb, and we're balancing, you know, the utilities needs versus the solar needs. Who's standing up for the ratepayers in this state? That's what I want to know.
Yes,
where
sir.
is the consumer advocate? Why hasn't he or she been hired? Because we need to have an advocate for them. We can't really serve as the advocate. That's not our role.
That's not our job, no, sir. And
Not our
Commissioner Williams has asked that question, and he was told that one would be forthcoming. And as you know, that's not our job. We're a judicial body, and I'd say to Commissioner Williams as well, one of the hardest things of this job is putting aside your feelings. We're up here to call balls and strikes, and we're up here to follow the law. And Act 236 started this process about 5 years ago, and Act 62 opens the door up with the Energy Freedom Act. And our job up here is we all took an oath to follow the law, to follow due process, the South Carolina Code of Laws, and the South Carolina Constitution. And I just believe that my motion, it comports with what the laws of this state say and what Act 62 requires us to do, regardless of my own feelings. We have to put our feelings aside, and I know that that's hard to do sometimes. And I know regardless of any leanings or feelings we might have, we have to follow the law. And I believe my motion does, as Commissioner Belser says, she challenges anyone to show her where we've done anything differently. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I have nothing further.
Thank you. Commissioner Hamilton.
Chairman, I move we call the question.
Okay. We have a call for the question. I want to say before we vote, I echo just a couple of things that Commissioner Irvin was talking with the frustration. We really had such a compressed time frame to really deal with this issue of this much importance. And the bad thing is we had to do it in a very short period of time. The good thing is we get to revisit it pretty soon. So I think we will hopefully, there will be lots of conversation on this, I know. Okay, are we ready to vote? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And I will ask those on the phone to cut your phone on and vote one way or the other.
Commissioner Williams votes no.
Okay,
Howard votes yes.
thank you. Commissioner Urban?
Irvin votes yes.
Thank you. The motion carries.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, we're going to take items 2 and 3 together. Item 2, docket number 2019-185E, and item 3, docket number 2019-186E. These items concern the Commission's ruling on avoided cost and related matters regarding Duke Energy Carolinas and Duke Energy Progress.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Belser.
I have a motion regarding these two dockets, and it's rather lengthy, and I hope that folks will bear with me. And when we get to some of the rates, I will be calling on the Elmo, but I'll alert you to that, if you would. First, I'd like to note and thank the parties for the partial stipulation that was reached among the parties. There were 5 primary terms of this stipulation that were agreed to. 1, that DEC and DEP's quantification of near-term project capacity reflected by existing plus transition solar QFs to be installed, namely 840 megawatts and 2,950 megawatts, is reasonable. 2, for the purposes of this proceeding, the Solar Integration Services Charge, or SISC, of $1.10 per megawatt hour and $2.39 per megawatt hour for DEC and DEP, respectively, are reasonable. This applies to small solar power producers that enter into PPAs or any legally enforceable obligation before the effective date of avoided cost calculations filed in the next DEC or DEP avoided cost proceedings before this Commission. These charges will not be subject to any adjustment during the term of the PPA. This SISC should apply prospectively only to projects subject to the avoided cost methodologies and contractual terms and conditions established in this proceeding, and shall not apply to the rates established in prior avoided cost proceedings, nor shall it be binding with respect to any subsequent avoided cost proceeding. Number 3, the SISC cannot be imposed on a controlled solar generator. This refers to any solar QF that is capable and agrees to operate in a manner that materially reduces or eliminates the need for additional ancillary services incurred by Duke. This includes, but is not limited to, solar with battery storage. Duke is required to submit to the Commission the guidelines to establish controlled solar generator by November 18, 2019. Number 4, the Astrape study used to calculate the SISC warrants further review. Duke will submit all inputs and methodology of the Astrape study for an independent technical review. The results of the review are to be filed in the next avoided cost filing by Duke for Commission review and interested parties to comment upon. Number 5, Duke will submit revised standard offer and large QF PPAs reflecting the stipulations of this settlement within 15 days of the Commission's final order approving the CISC. As part of my motion, I move that we approve this stipulation and include its terms in our order. Next, addressing the issue of responsiveness and cooperation, what I think we also think of as transparency. For purposes of these proceedings and in accordance with South Carolina Code Annotated 58-41-20J and I, we consider the utility's responsiveness in providing all documents, information, and items necessary for the Commission's third-party consultant to complete his report. Additionally, the utility's avoided cost filing must be reasonably transparent so that underlying assumptions, data, and results can be independently reviewed and verified. According to the Commission's consultant, the avoided cost filing and responses to data requests and requests for production of documents by DEC and DEP were reasonably transparent. The Commission is appreciative of responsiveness, cooperation, and transparency in all matters, not just these. As such attributes help ensure that we can perform our jobs and discharge our obligations to establish just and reasonable rates and to serve the citizens of South Carolina. I do note that our third-party consultant noted suggestions by ORS witness Ori and SBA witness Burgess to assist in future filings, and I hope that DEC and DEP will consider those suggestions for future filings. I move that we find Duke adequately met responsiveness, cooperation, and transparency as required by Act 62. The Duke companies utilize the peaker method in these proceedings. I move that we find this method reasonably reflects the utility's actual avoided costs pursuant to South Carolina Code Annotated 58-41-20B3. When considering the avoided cost, such rates should be calculated based on current solar levels, not to include solar expected to be installed, such as the solar levels Duke expects due to North Carolina's legislative mandate. Further, I move that the avoided capacity seasonal weightings recommended by OR witness Mr. Ori are reasonable, and the Duke companies should update the respective avoided costs to reflect such allocation. With that allocation, the avoided cost resulting from the use of the Duke method are, and I'm going to ask Mr. Powers to use the Elmo here, and I apologize that it's going to take me a few minutes to read through these. I do have copies of this document for interested parties at the end of the meeting. For Duke Energy Carolinas, avoided capacity 10-year rate, summer capacity 0.0330 per kilowatt hour. Winter capacity AM 0.0394 per kilowatt hour. Winter capacity PM 0.0131 kilowatt hour. And let me note that if I misstate something in reading these numbers, the document controls, what will be in the motion controls, and please excuse my misstatement. As for avoided energy for Duke Energy Carolinas, the 10-year rate, summer premium peak PM 0.0458 kilowatt hour per kilowatt hour. Summer peak PM 0.0448 per kilowatt hour. Summer off peak 0.0260 per kilowatt hour. Winter premium peak AM 0.0504 per kilowatt hour. Winter on peak AM 0.0461 per kilowatt hour. Winter on peak PM 0.0415 per kilowatt hour. Winter off peak, winter off peak 0.0270 per kilowatt hour. Shoulder on peak 0.0339 per kilowatt hour. Shoulder off peak 0.0228 per kilowatt hour. For Duke Energy Progress, avoided capacity variable summer capacity 0.0029 per kilowatt hour, winter capacity AM 0.1369 per kilowatt hour, winter capacity PM 0.0595 per kilowatt hour, 5-year rate, summer capacity 0.0030 per kilowatt hour, winter capacity AM 0.1395 per kilowatt hour, winter capacity PM 0.0607 per kilowatt hour, 10-year rate, summer capacity 0.0030 per kilowatt hour, winter capacity AM 0.1437 per kilowatt hour, winter capacity PM 0.06250 per kilowatt hour. Avoided energy, 10-year rate, summer premium peak PM 0.0330 per kilowatt hour, summer own peak PM 0.0311 per kilowatt hour, summer off peak 0.0268 per kilowatt hour, winter premium peak AM 0.0358 per kilowatt hour, winter on peak AM 0.0354 per kilowatt hour, winter on peak PM 0.0342 per kilowatt hour, winter off peak 0.0275 per kilowatt hour, shoulder on peak 0.0298 per kilowatt hour, shoulder off peak 0.0226 per kilowatt hour. And I hope that I read those correctly. Further, the company has proposed to calculate avoided cost rates for large QFs at the time of the request. This is to ensure that the avoided cost rate reflects the most current assumptions and avoids the risk of stale avoided cost. It will also reflect the specific operating profile of the large QF and result in a more reliable avoided cost rate. Therefore, I move that we approve the avoided cost rates as I have outlined. The CISC has been stipulated, as mentioned earlier, between the parties. I move that we approve the rates mentioned earlier of $1.10 per megawatt hour for DEC and $2.39 per megawatt hour for DEP for solar QFs in each territory respectively. There are other contract terms that need to be addressed, most notably the contract length. The General Assembly has mandated that electrical utilities must initially offer to purchase power from QFs pursuant to fixed-priced PERPA PPAs with commercially reasonable terms and a duration of 10 years. Act 62 also provides that the Commission may approve commercially reasonable fixed-price power purchase agreements with a duration longer than 10 years, which must contain additional terms, conditions, and/or rate structures as proposed by intervening parties and approved by the Commission, including but not limited to a reduction in the contract price relative to the 10-year avoided cost. This is from South Carolina Code Annotated, Section 58-41-20F1. During the hearing, Johnson Development witness Chilton agreed that a decrement to the 10-year avoided cost rate is required in order for the Commission to adopt a fixed-price contract for a term longer than 10 years. However, in response to Commission questions, she did not specify any specific proposal that JDA supported to comply with the statutory requirement for the Commission to consider a longer-term fixed-price PPA. Therefore, Commission approval of a fixed-price power purchase agreement with a duration longer than 10 years is not supported by the evidence in this record. Only the 10-year contract term is. Further, according to company witness Brown, the proposed fixed 10-year fixed avoided cost rates under Act 62 would be the longest fixed rates offered under PERP in the Southeast for projects larger than 1 megawatt. Because any determination by the Commission to approve contracts with a duration of longer than 10 years must be predicated on specific proposals from interveners that comply with South Carolina Code Annotated Section 58-41-20F1, and are entered into the evidentiary record during the course of this proceeding, I move we decline to approve the proposals from Johnson Development and the South Carolina Solar Business Association at this time. I do note that such proposals and others may appropriately be addressed in the record of the next avoided cost proceeding, such that all parties may have their due process rights protected. Other contract terms and conditions and dockets 2019-185 and 186E pertaining to standard offered PPAs are: 1, regarding whether material alterations to the standard offered PPA should apply retroactively or only prospectively, I move that we adopt witness Levitus's modification that states, quote, Duke's terms and conditions need to provide that Duke's consent to requested material alterations will not be unreasonably withheld, conditioned, or delayed. I also move that material alterations should apply prospectively. 2, regarding Duke's proposed 30-month in-service date following avoided cost approval, I moved we adopt the position proposed by SBA witness Levitus of a COD deadline under the contract that is extended based on interconnection delays. I know that Mr. Levitus stated that the Solar Business Alliance does not object to Duke's proposed in-service date, provided it is linked to the interconnection facilities and network in-service date. The record reflects Duke has agreed to this provision with respect to large QF PPAs. For large PPAs, the contract terms and conditions are: 1, regarding facility study agreement as a condition of signing a large QF PPA, I move that Duke should be required to provide a system impact study within a timely manner to the QF from the time of the interconnection request. And if a system impact study is not provided in a timely manner, either 1 year or an amount of time that is mutually agreeable between the buyer and the seller, then the requirement that the QF execute and return a facility study agreement in order to sign a PPA should be lifted. 2, responding to the risk to the QF of entering into a PPA and then facing either interconnection costs that make the project unviable or significant liquidated damages because of termination is unreasonable, I move that we accept Power Advisory's recommendation that if Duke does not provide the system impact study within 1 year of interconnection request, or an amount of time that is mutually agreeable between the contracting parties, then the QF should be provided an off-ramp allowing it to terminate the PPA without liability if their interconnection facilities and network upgrades required for interconnection exceed $75,000 per megawatt per AC. 3, I move we allow surety bonds as a permissible performance assurance. With regard to the Notice of Commitment Form or NOC, 1, adopt the proposed changes offered by Duke Witness Johnson in his rebuttal testimony. 2, reject Duke's proposed requirement that a QF must secure all required permits and land use approvals prior to establishing a LEO. 3, adopt the 365-day in-service requirement following executing the Notice of Commitment Form, but extend the deadline to account for additional time needed by the utility to complete required interconnection facilities and network upgrades. This is similar to Duke's large QF PPA term. 4, regarding an off-ramp should interconnection facilities and network upgrades exceed $75,000 per megawatt, I move that we treat this the same as we did above, which was item 2 under the large PPAs, which would be if Duke does not provide the system impact study within 1 year of interconnection request or an amount of time that is mutually agreeable between the contracting parties, then the QF should be provided an off-ramp, allowing it to terminate the PPA without reliability if the interconnection facilities and network upgrades required for interconnection exceed $75,000 per megawatt per AC. Mr. Chairman, an order more fully setting out these issues will follow. That concludes my motion.
Thank you. You've heard Commissioner Belcher's motion. Are there questions or comments? Commissioner
Mr. Chairman.
Hamilton, Commissioner Hamilton first, then we'll get you, Commissioner Williams.
Excuse me. Mr. Chairman, I would like to take a few minutes to say that I appreciate the work of all the parties and interveners helping us get to the point that we have today to meet the deadlines that are ahead of us. I think we've taken a giant step in changing electrification in South Carolina. I think it's be a positive move. I think we'll see a lot more innovative things that we're going to have coming down the pipe. But I support both motions, and I thank you for the time.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to, again, point out to my colleagues that I don't think the 10-year term is going to meet the intention of the General Assembly with Act 62 to ensure that small power producers, specifically solar producers, will have the ability to seek financing or to receive financing. I understand the position of Commissioner Belzer. I just have a difference of opinion in that a 15-year term would be sufficient, and we're empowered based on the act, based on our expert, and based on what we've heard during the course of the hearing to adopt that 15-year period. I understand, as we said in the last motion, that there's a difference of opinion on that. I just think that the commission has the ability to make that decision. I agree that everyone has worked hard on this matter, and that we're going to continue to work, considering that this is not something that's going to go away. And I appreciate the staff for being flexible and allowing me to participate in this matter, despite the fact that I'm thousands of miles away. I'd also like to thank the USO for providing a facility for me to make this call. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Belzer.
I'd just like to say to Commissioner Williams, I certainly understand where you're coming from, and I understand your position, and I have a feeling that we'll be discussing this issue sooner rather than later. And thank you for sharing your comments, and hopefully we can reach an agreement in the near future. Thank you.
Commissioner Belzer. Commissioner Whitfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Williams, I would just also like to say that certainly, as in the last motion, I certainly see and share your concerns. I am aware that the parties have worked hard, our staff has worked hard, everybody's worked hard to get us this far with administering Act 62. And as Commissioner Belzer just said, I think we'll be revisiting these things again soon. And as solar continues to deploy and continues to grow in this state, and as I said in the other motion, while not the focus of the evidence in this case, rooftop solar's position in South Carolina will be greatly improved by the adoption of this. And Commissioner Irvin, I also share the concerns you brought out about the ratepayers and about them being hit overcharged and be unintended consequences, I think is the way you worded it. But at this time, I think Commissioner Belzer has carefully, very, very carefully and diligently crafted a detailed motion and had her charts up on the screen, and I know you two aren't able to see that, but she has worked hard, and I'm going to support her motion, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions or
Mr. Chair.
comments? Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Commissioner Irvin.
I want to echo colleagues in thanking all the parties and participants in this process. It's not been an easy process. There were severe time constraints given the statutory deadline imposed to make a decision. It's a large step in South Carolina. The General Assembly has certainly worked hard to provide a mechanism to open the door to solar development, and they're to be commended for their work. I would say this, that this is just the beginning. It's not the end. I'm pleased that we were able to impose some commercially reasonable terms that will help the solar providers in executing their plans. And I would also encourage them and others to look at what's going on in North Carolina. As you recall, Witness Snyder advocated for the commission to take steps to ensure that South Carolina is procuring the right volume of solar energy at the right pace and at the right price. And a competitive procurement with set volumetric targets would help reduce the risk for ratepayers as compared to no volumetric limits as we see under the PURPA PPAs. So I hope that South Carolina, through the work of the General Assembly and the Commission and the parties, can move toward a competitive procurement process which will ultimately reduce the price of the ratepayers' bills because we'll be procuring solar energy at the lowest possible cost. And I would refer you to the transcript Volume 1, pages 203 and 204 for that discussion, because if we had a consumer advocate today, I believe that consumer advocate would be saying we need a competitive procurement process as well. It's fine to use PURPA, and I'm pleased that we've taken that step and that needed to be done. But I think to promote solar energy, a competitive process for future procurement would serve everyone's best interest, and I would hope that we would look at that as one of the next steps. I support the motion that's been made by Commissioner Belser, and I commend her on her hard work and the staff's work in getting all this put together for us today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Commissioners, any other questions or comments? If not, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Commissioners over the phone.
Commissioner Irvin votes. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Commissioner Williams first.
For reasons stated before, Commissioner Williams votes no.
Thank you. Commissioner Irvin.
Commissioner Irvin votes yes.
Thank you. And the motion carries. Thank you.
Chairman, item number 4, docket number 2009-84A. This matter concerns the Office of Regulatory Staff's request for approval of revised transportation annual report forms.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Whitfield.
matter in this docket, the Office of Regulatory Staff has submitted a 2020 transportation annual report notification letter and a 2019 annual report for household goods and hazardous waste form for approval by the Public Service Commission. Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve both forms with the following edit. The PSC contact at the end of second sentence on last paragraph should read, and I quote, and the Public Service Commission at contact@psc.sc.gov/803.896.5100, end quote. I further move that ORS e-files copies of both documents with the proposed change. So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. You've heard Commissioner Whitfield's motion. Are there questions or comments? If not, all in favor, please say aye. Okay, and Commissioner Williams?
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Urban?
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, that concludes today's agenda.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to say thank you to everyone who's worked on this. This has been a tough process. It's not cut and dried, and it's a pretty complicated set of facts and issues that we've been dealing with and will continue to deal with. I want to thank the staff for working hard on this as well, and the commissioners have spent an inordinate amount of time going over this and talking it and reading it. And so I just want to say thank you to all, and we are adjourned.
Would you put those out there for anybody that might want one?
Joe.
Thank you for joining us for today's post-meeting summary. These commission business meetings are held each Wednesday at 2 p.m. All agendas and materials are posted to the docket management system prior to each meeting. If you have questions about commission business, we encourage you to reach out to us at robert.bachman@psc.sc.gov or via social media by following the South Carolina Utility Consumer brand on Twitter @UtilityConsumer and on Facebook at SC Utility Consumer, or the Public Service Commission's Facebook and Twitter pages at PSC of SC. Today's business meeting started at 2 p.m. with Commissioners Howard, Irving, and Williams calling in and with a supplemental agenda, specifically with a request to establish proceedings for the purpose of considering revisions to the standards promulgated pursuant to South Carolina Code Annotated Section 58-27-460, following up on a Commission directive order issue in October. Commissioner Hamilton made a motion to, quote, move that we instruct the clerk's office to administratively close docket number 2019-197-E and to set up an intervention deadline, and move that we invite the parties to confer and suggest a procedural schedule for this docket. This motion carried. Item 1 on the utilities agenda was a request brought in docket number 2019-184-E involving the South Carolina Energy Freedom Act, also known as Act 62, and the requirements placed upon utility providers in the state by its passage. That includes 11 total issues under consideration. The list of those will be included in the order. Commissioner Whitfield moved to deny Dominion's motion to strike and to adopt the recommendations in the Power Advisory Report and to find the actual costs and costs of power production as reasonable. Commissioner Whitfield's motion and ancillary materials will be adapted into a directive order to be added to the Commission websites in the near future. Commissioner Williams commented on the issue of transparency, noting that the avoided cost methodology was spotlighted by the Power Advisory team and noted that, quote, it's completely unacceptable that an outside independent expert echoes some of the same complaints, end quote, the Commission has had with Dominion and SCE&G in the past. He underlined that Dominion must be completely transparent with all matters. Quote, lack of transparency is completely unacceptable and will not be tolerated, end quote. He also spoke of his concern that the proposed motion is limited to 10 years, and that testimony suggested contract terms longer than 10 years would be more economically viable. Have we met the intent of Act 62, Commissioner Williams asked, non-rhetorically. Commissioner Belser then spoke to her shared concern with Commissioner Williams, noting that, quote, the record may have not been complete with regard to terms of any contract for periods longer than 10 years, end quote. Noting also that under Act 62, it is a may that allows the Commission to approve fixed power arrangements. Commissioner Irving spoke to his concerns as well, noting that he expected talk of longer contract periods that were brought up during the hearings. Who's advocating for ratepayers in this instance, inquired Commissioner Irving, the people who, quote, could just get stuck with overpayments if we don't predict the future, end quote. Commissioner Whitfield spoke to Commissioner Irving's concerns, noting that ORS's duties include consumer advocacy, and that the consumer advocate will be involved in the process going forward. Commissioner Whitfield's motion carried. Again, the full video of Commission discussion is available on the South Carolina ETV website at www.scetv.org/PSC. An archive of every business meeting, including today's, will be available at that page. Item 2 was a similar request in docket number 2019-185E, which involves Duke Energy Carolinas LLC's standard offer, and item 3 was a similar request in docket number 2019-186E, which involves Duke Energy Progress LLC's standard offer and related issues. These two items were taken together, with Commissioner Belser making the motion to adopt the testimony presented to Duke's proposed service date, to set forth the timelines and thresholds for any interconnection agreements, and to accept Power Advisory's recommendations. Noting the 5 primary terms of the stipulated agreement, Commissioner Belser outlined the terms of the agreement, which will be adapted within the Commission's directive, and that will also be posted on Commission websites in the future. There was some Commissioner discussion that followed Commissioner Belser's motion that is also available at scetv.org/PSC. Again, that's scetv.org/PSC. Item 4 was a request for approval made by ORS of the revised Transportation Annual Report Forms and the cover letter for distribution to affected stakeholders. Some background here. Through Commission Order Number 2019-706, the Commission has approved the procedure for companies to file all sewerage, water, transportation Class E, and telecommunications annual reports electronically. In November, ORS filed proposed revisions to the Transportation Class E annual report form and the report notification letter, including updating the contact page, and is now requesting approval of the updated form in the meeting today. Commissioner Whitfield made the motion to approve this updated form, but did note a minor update that any future forms need to change the contact address to a set contract address. This motion carried. In addition to these items, Commissioners were also briefed on 63 other items related to utilities in South Carolina. The complete list of these issues, as well as links to dockets and all materials, is available on the docket management system. That website again is dms.psc.sc.gov. There was no transportation agenda at today's meeting. The next transportation session will occur during the next Commission business meeting, which will take place on Monday, November 21st at 11:30 a.m. Again, that's the next Commission business meeting will be Monday, November 21st at 11:30 a.m. You can access the live stream broadcast of that meeting by visiting our site at www.psc.sc.gov and clicking on live stream. If you have questions about today's proceedings, please follow us on social media. We're on Twitter at PSC of SC and at Utility Consumer, and we're also on Facebook at Public Service Commission of South Carolina or SC Utility Consumer. You can also email me directly at robert.bachman@psc.sc.gov or can call the offices of the PSC at 803-896-5100. Thank you.